Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So we are going to continue from the last class. Okay, what we discussed in the last class, if we have the equation of motion that we have been writing so far. Okay, for earthquake excitation, it can be written like this. And earthquake excitation is already given in terms of time acceleration pair, or the time step would be given to you and only the acceleration values given to you. Okay, so in general, an acceleration looks like something, acceleration history would look like something like this, an arbitrary variation of UGT. Okay, and you would have to employ any of one of the numerical methods that we have discussed in the last chapter to find out solution to this equation. Okay, and basically we said that we are going to introduce a concept of equivalent static force. Okay, because our goal is for any structural engineer, okay, and in earthquake resistant design is for a given ground motion UG of T. Okay, in the end, if you have to design either the column or beam, you want to know what are the forces. Okay, so you want to know the shear force, moment, and the axial forces. Now, axial forces are mostly due to gravity. Of course, there would be some enhancement or reduction due to seismic forces, but it is mostly due to gravity. Okay, now shear forces, for example, okay, would be generated and moment would be generated due to deformation in the structure. Okay, and we said that we are going to introduce a concept of equivalent static force, which is the lateral stiffness times displacement. So the idea is that I'm going to analyze my system, okay, and I'm going to find out, okay, going to solve this equation of motion and get my u of t. So at any time instant, once I have got my u of t, okay, can I say if I apply a force, okay, which is lateral stiffness times ut, and do the static analysis now, not the dynamic analysis. I've already done the dynamic analysis and found out u of t. Okay, now I'm saying that at any time instant, if I found out ut, if I apply a force which I would call as equivalent static force equal to k equal to ut, like this, k times ut, and if I do the static analysis subject to this force fst, the deformation would again be what? If I do the static analysis, the deformation would again be u of t. Okay, because my deformation would be whatever the fs times k. This is only if I do the static analysis, not the dynamic analysis. So the equivalent static analysis, okay, is a procedure in which what we do, we first perform the dynamic analysis, okay, to get the basically the displacement u of t. Once I've got u of t, okay, I apply a equivalent static force at that time instant and then do the static analysis to find out the forces in each of these members. And you might ask, why do we do that? Why can't we just find out the forces using the dynamic analysis? Because it is very easy, I mean relatively easy of course, to find out ut, okay, but if you have to do the dynamic analysis, okay, and to find out the individual member forces, okay, directly, then it becomes difficult. And this procedure here, okay, in which I first find out the deformation and then apply the equivalent static force and do this, because static analysis we are familiar with, okay, either through theoretical calculation or through software. Okay, it is easier to do static analysis. Dynamic analysis is a little bit difficult. Okay, and as you would see later, okay, equivalent static procedure can be used to find out the peak responses of the system very easily without doing any sort of dynamic analysis at all. Okay, so if I apply equivalent static force, which is equal to K times lateral stiffness times the displacement. Okay, and do the static analysis, I can find out the forces. This is same as, or like, similar to if I have to do the dynamic analysis and find out the forces in the system. Okay, so we introduce the concept of equivalent static force, okay, which is Fs equal to K of ut, and which is evident from here. If I do the dynamic analysis, my displacement is ut. If I apply the static force KUT and do the static analysis, again my displacement is ut. Okay, is this point clear to you? Equivalent static force and equivalent static procedure. Okay, so at any time instant, I find out the displacement using dynamic method. Once the displacement is known, okay, I apply equivalent static force and do the static analysis to find out the forces in the beams and columns. Okay, now if I consider for this case, okay, subject to this equivalent static force, typically the response quantities that need to be found out are the base shear at that time instant and the moment, base moment. Okay, and that I can easily do by writing VBT as Fs of t. If you cut the structure here and basically take the free body diagram. Okay, and your MBT would be nothing but whatever the force that is being applied at the top times the height. Okay, now these concepts look very simple. Okay, but you would see, okay, and you might think like, there's nothing to it, but the same concept can be extended for multiple degree of freedom system as well. And we will actually do that, okay, in later chapters where you have multiple, like, multi-story buildings. Okay, and the same procedure can be utilized. Only thing in that would be these things, these parameters are basically K and U and all those parameters are in terms of vector and matrices. Okay, so the base shear and the base moment at any time instant can be known using this equivalent static analysis. All right. Now, one more thing that is to be noted here. When I write the equivalent static force, it is K times ut, and K is nothing but m omega n square times ut. Okay. Now, if you look at this quantity here, I'm going to write this as ma of t, where a is the pseudo acceleration. Okay, a is the pseudo acceleration. Okay, do not confuse it, as I told in the last class, with, okay, total acceleration, which is u dot of t, u double dot of t. Okay, this is not equal to a of t. Okay, it is only equal to a of t when the damping is 0. So if you look at the expression for u of t, remember we had written this expression here, and we had u dot t plus omega n square u of t equal to 0. This is the equation of motion for seismic excitation, where u dot of t is actually relative acceleration ut plus the ground acceleration ugt. So if you look at here, ut is nothing but minus omega n square u of t minus 2 zeta omega n u of t. So in general, total acceleration is not equal to this pseudo acceleration here, except for the cases where either damping is equal to 0 or the velocity is equal to 0. Okay, is this clear to all of you? All right, so the equivalent static force can be written in terms of not only the displacement but also in terms of mass times pseudo acceleration, and we define pseudo acceleration at as omega n square times ut. Okay, and then Vb can be written as Fst and Mb can be written as h of Fst. Okay, now the question comes, typically you have during the dynamic analysis several magnitudes of the forces, okay, at different time instants in a dynamic analysis as the time progresses. And most of the times what happens, these structural members are need to be designed for peak forces, right? So you design them for worst possible scenario. So you need to find out what are the peak forces, or let us say instead of peak forces, peak response quantities. So you are not interested in, like, I mean, you are interested, but most of the time as a design engineer, okay, the thing that you are most interested in, peak value of the response quantities. Okay, and that's where we introduce the concept of response spectrum. In the previous classes, okay, we have defined response spectrum, where we discussed that a response spectrum is nothing but the plot of peak responses of all possible linear single degree of freedom system, okay, subject to a particular ground motion. Okay, in that case it was like, not the ground motion, but it was some pulse excitation or something like that, or a ramp excitation. Okay, now for a ground motion, we have said that my displacement depends on what parameters? T, Tn and zeta. So if you have to find out the maximum value of u naught, how do I find that out? It would be maximum over time. So maximum over time u of Tn and omega. Okay, and basically the response spectrum is the plot of peak responses of all single degree of freedom system subject to a ground motion. So what does it mean? Let us say, what does it mean? Okay, I have already told you that, and I've showed you this picture here. Let me just copy this figure. Okay, if I consider, let us say, this is the my ground motion, okay, which is given to me. All right, and this is given in terms of g. Now, depending upon, as I said, the maximum response depend only not only maximum, but the displacement response depends only on time, the time period, or the damping. So let me consider a single degree of freedom system with same damping, zeta equal to 2%, but I'm considering different value of time period. In one, I'm considering 0.5 second, okay, then 1 second, and then 2 second. Okay, now if you look at the response, if you plot the response subject to this ground excitation, I will get certain response for this single degree of freedom system. Okay, and then with 1 second and 2%, I would get another displacement, and then with 2 second and 2%, I would get another peak displacement. Now if I plot this peak displacement on the vertical axis and on the horizontal axis, I plot each of these single degree of freedom system. Okay, so 1 second, 0.5 second, 1 second, and 2 second. Okay, it would give me 3 points here. Okay, and if I, like, do this for infinite such number of single degree of freedom system, so that I vary the time period, the natural time period, I can get a plot, and that plot is basically what is called a response spectrum, okay, for a ground motion. So remember, for each ground motion, there would be a unique response spectrum, and that response spectrum could be for any response quantity. Here I have drawn it for displacement, but I can also do it for acceleration or velocity or any other response quantity. Okay, and it is defined, response spectrum is always defined for a single degree of freedom system, because each of these points or Tn corresponds to a single degree of freedom system. So this is how we develop response spectrum. Okay, now why do we need response spectrum? Say you are a designer and you are trying to design, okay, a system, and you don't want to do complicated calculation, doing, like, dynamic analysis. Okay, it seems easy for a single degree of freedom system, the dynamic analysis, but it is very difficult for a multiple degree of freedom system, and it also takes a lot of time. So let us say for a ground motion, somebody has developed this once and provided you this response spectra here. Okay, so somebody has gone ahead, done a programming and did it only once. What you need to do, okay, as a designer, you basically need the peak response. Okay, and if this is available for a ground motion, okay, any ground motion, each ground motion will have a separate response spectra. All you need to do is to find out what is the time period of your system. Come here, have a look at it, that for that time period, what is the displacement? Let us say any random time period, you come and see what is the displacement. So you can find out U naught using this, and you can find out the peak responses. How do I find out peak responses? Well, if you know the maximum deformation is U naught, you can apply peak equivalent static forces K times U naught. Okay, and then find out, subject to peak equivalent static force, what are the forces in the system. For example, what is VB naught and what is MB naught. Okay, just using the peak response, because that is what we are interested in. So VB naught, remember, I need to apply peak equivalent static forces as K times U naught. VB naught would be, or Fs naught equal to Ku naught. This can also be written as mass times, okay, maximum pseudo acceleration. So remember, base shear depends on the pseudo acceleration, not the total acceleration. Okay, and your base shear can be found it as. So we have seen that at any time instant, I can find out these response quantities. But if I have the response spectrum available, I don't need to find out at any particular time, because as a designer, I'm already interested in finding out the peak forces, and that I can get from the response spectrum. Okay. And what happens, because in this case, my total response depends on pseudo acceleration. Okay. So in addition to deformation response spectrum, I would also be interested in pseudo acceleration response spectrum. Okay. So basically, let me just define it once. Okay. I said that my U naught would be nothing but, okay, maximum of U of, or let us say, I write as my magnitude Tn zeta. My U dot would be maximum of U of T Tn zeta. This is dot here, and then maximum total acceleration is this. All right. Now this is my deformation response spectrum. If I vary the time period Tn, okay, deformation response spectrum. This is relative velocity, not pseudo velocity. This is relative velocity response spectrum. And this is not the relative, but acceleration response spectrum. As I said, this is important to us because my internal forces are dependent on the value of the peak relative deformation. However, relative velocity is not that important, okay, from the structural engineering point of view. And total acceleration response spectrum is important, okay, because many times it helps us in finding out the acceleration on sensitive equipment and component inside a structure. But what is important to us is actually pseudo acceleration. Okay, and as I've told you, my pseudo acceleration is related to the relative deformation as a omega square n, omega square times the U naught, isn't it? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to define another quantity which is V, and which is equal to, okay, so first let me write down in terms of Vt here. This is called pseudo velocity, okay, because it has units of velocity, but the pseudo velocity is actually not equal to the relative velocity in the system. Again, that you have to, we are using the, okay, term pseudo just to make the distinction that it is not equal to the relative velocity and the pseudo acceleration is not equal to the total acceleration. Okay. So the maximum value of the pseudo velocity would also be omega n times U naught. Okay, so now remember, in terms of base shear actually depends on the pseudo acceleration. So we are interested in knowing what is the relative deformation. Let us call this capital D now. Okay, and then pseudo acceleration and pseudo velocity, and they are basically related as per these equation. And this equation can be further written down as A divided by omega n is equal to V is equal to omega n U naught. Okay, so peak response quantities are written like this. So even if you have one of these quantity available, you can get other two just using this equation. Okay, so like we had drawn, remember we had drawn the response spectrum for the displacement, which looked like something like this. Okay, so let us say this is D here or U naught here, let us say. This is D here and this is Tn. Okay, corresponding to the same Tn, the same deformation response spectra, I can find out for each and every point, my A would be omega n square times U naught, which I can also write it as 2 pi by Tn times U naught. So corresponding to each point, I just have to multiply with this factor 2 pi by Tn, okay, to get the acceleration response spectrum. And velocity response spectrum, I can get it as omega n times U naught, or this can also be written as 2 pi by Tn times U naught. Okay, so it would look like something like in this case, okay, for velocity response spectrum. So this is velocity response spectrum. Okay, and I can also get acceleration response spectrum by multiplying either this with 2 pi by Tn square or this by 2 pi by Tn. And it looks like something like this. Okay, this is acceleration response, pseudo acceleration response spectrum. Okay, so this is how we actually get the three response spectrum. Mostly we don't use velocity that much, but we quite extensively use the displacement response spectrum because internal forces are connected to it, or acceleration response spectrum because FSO can either be obtained as k times U naught or m times pseudo acceleration. Okay. Now, what happens that in many of the design codes, the base shear, remember base shear we can write it as m times A. Okay, if this is my structure, okay, I apply a force equal to k U naught, which is equal to mass times pseudo acceleration. I can write it like that. And if mass, I write it as weight divided by g. I can further write this as A divided by g times U, W. Okay, this quantity here is many times called seismic coefficient, and this is called the seismic weight. And if some of you have done or you are doing some kind of earthquake resistant design in any other courses, or if you've studied it before, this term must be familiar to you, seismic coefficient and seismic weight. And this is where it comes from. Okay, the total base shear is actually some percentage of the total weight of the structure. Okay, so the base shear in a structure is some percentage. So this is the base shear that you are going to apply due to an earthquake. So initially, remember, as we discussed yesterday, that people did not, or when the earthquake engineering practice had not matured, okay, people did not know a lot of concepts of earthquake engineering at that time. People knew that earthquakes come laterally, and most of the design structures were designed for the vertical loads. So they knew that they had to design the structure for the lateral force. They just did not know what extent of forces these structure need to be designed. So initially what they did, they just started taking the total weight of the structure and multiplying it with some certain factor. Okay, let us say 10% or 20%, and then apply that load laterally to represent the effect of earthquake. This is at the very beginning of the earthquake resistant design practice. And you would be amazed that even if you do that, your structure would still be very safe during earthquake compared to the case where you have just designed for the vertical, even if you design for 10%. And even right now, when we are doing so much of sophisticated analysis, doing all those things, even now you will see that after doing all those analysis, your A by G, or the seismic coefficient, will actually come out to be around 10% and 20%. Okay, most of the cases. Of course, in extreme cases, it might be higher or like smaller, but typically this is a good enough approximation for the earthquake forces. Okay. So once the peak responses are known in a structure, it becomes very easy to find out the forces in a system. Okay, and basically what happens actually, a ground motion is given to you. Okay, a ground motion is given to you. Somebody for you, not, I mean, you can do it. We have learned how to do it, but as a designer, somebody would give you a response spectra for this. which would look like, let us say we are talking about acceleration response spectra. Okay, so a pseudo acceleration response spectra, something like this. Okay, so what are you going to do? Okay, so we are just discussing the procedure to get the peak responses. Okay, so basically our goal is find out the forces in the frame member. So you are going to come up with the initial trial design. Okay, some dimension of the column beam, and then you are going to estimate some forces. Okay, and then lump the mass, let us say, and this is we are only considering single degree of freedom system representation. And then you are going to find out what is the time period of the system for the initial trial. Okay, so you are going to find out what is this quantity here. Once that is found out, you are going to refer it to provided response spectra provided to you, and then look at what is the value of acceleration. Okay, and then either you can apply equivalent static force, which is mass times acceleration, or you can compare the peak displacement, which is nothing but a divided by omega n square. Okay, which would be Tn by 2 pi whole square times omega. So that Fs naught can also be written as K times U naught. So use any of these expression and then find out Vb naught and Mu naught using the equation that we have already derived. Okay. So this is the procedure that is followed, like, or I can say that this is a very simplistic form of the general procedure that is followed for the seismic earthquake resistant design analysis of a structure. Okay, using equivalent static analysis. Okay, now one of the problem that happens, okay, to designer, let us say I know that I'm building my structure at a particular location. Okay, let us say that location is in, like, Bhuj, Gujarat. Okay, and at that location people have traditionally measured what would be the ground acceleration. Okay, if you measure and then this response spectra is obtained. Okay, this is A versus Tn. Now let us say this was measured in 1950. If you measure the same ground at the same location ground acceleration at another time when the earthquake had come, okay, it would again be different. Okay, again let us say you measured after some years, your response spectra would be different. Okay, so the question becomes, as a designer, which of these should be used? Whether this response spectra or this response spectra or this response spectra, because even at the same site, okay, at the same site, okay, the ground acceleration that were measured, if you construct the response spectra, it would be different if it is measured at slightly different location or at different time, because you design a structure for a future earthquake and you don't know which of these earthquake. Okay, so whether the earthquake that will come, whether it is comparable to 1 or comparable to 2 or 3 or many such motions, let us say 20 motions you have. Okay, and if you don't have ground motion, basically what you do at that location, you see that at a location which is similar to this one. Okay, so I will say that at a location which has similar geographical characteristic, like similar kind of fault mechanism or similar kind of source to site distance, I'm going to take the ground motion. And let us say you have obtained these many ground motion and these many response spectra. So as a designer, there is so much of uncertainty that which response spectrum need to be used. And that's where the concept of design spectrum comes into picture. Okay, design spectrum is obtained from the response spectrum. Okay, but there is stark difference between response spectrum and design spectrum, because design response spectrum is very irregular and you can have 20, 30, hundreds of such ground motion. So what do we basically do? Let us say if I take the average of all these ground motions, what will happen? If you know that if you take average of multiple numbers or multiple curves, the resultant curves is actually smoother than the individual curve. So it is relatively smoother than the individual response spectrum. Okay, and let us do one more thing. Okay, so this is the mean response spectrum of all such earthquake. Okay, so this is the mean value. Now we can do one more thing. We can find out if this is the mean, then at each time period, can I also find mean plus standard deviation? Okay, so that would be somewhere around this. Let us say little bit larger because mean plus standard deviation would be higher than the mean value. Okay, this is also 84.1 percentile. Okay, so then as a designer, you don't want this much of uncertainty that you have these many response spectrum and just by changing the time period from here to here, your design forces are increasing by 50%. You don't want that, but you also don't want your structure to be unsafe because this earthquake might come 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 like that. Any of these earthquake can come. So we say that conservatively what I'm going to do, I'm going to do some statistical analysis and then I'm going to find out a mean plus standard deviation which covers most of these response spectrum, okay, without being so irregular or without being having this much of jaggedness or uncertainty. So you do that and you take this spectrum, and right now I'm saying mean plus standard deviation. As a code committee or as a designer or like people who are responsible for developing response spectra, they can even go for higher percentile like 90th per 95 percentile. So at each time period your response, basically the peak value is having probability that it is within 95 percentile of all the individual ground motion. So as a designer, what do? We first take the mean of all such ground motion and then we try to develop a response spectrum which is smoother. Okay, something like this. Okay, and if you want, you can take either the higher value so that all values are within this, something like this. So that's how we develop the design spectrum. So a design spectrum is a smoother, okay, response spectrum. Okay, this is a very crude definition, of course. Okay, basically a technical description is this, that we do statistical analysis to find out, okay, the mean value and the percentile value, distribution value, and then we come up with some design spectrum. So this is not your headache, although procedures are available, okay, that can be followed to obtain the design spectrum. But typically a design spectrum is provided in the code. For example, Indian codes, you have IS 1893, which provides you the design spectrum. Okay, so it's a smoother response spectrum used for design and not the response spectrum of individual ground motion. So a typical, okay, response spectrum looks like this. Okay, where this is acceleration and this is time period. Okay, and if you look at this, this is somewhat similar to the response spectrum, but a smoothened version of the response spectrum, individual response spectrum. So for each site, depending upon where you are located, in which, let us say if you're located in Mumbai, Delhi, or any other place, okay, depending on that place, you would have a response spectrum provided to you that basically represents the level of seismic hazard that the structure is exposed to. Okay, so each of the location, okay, would have a unique seismic response spectra associated with them depending upon their seismic zone. So for example, India, it has been it has been divided in 4 seismic zone and it starts with 2. There is no seismic zone 1. Okay, seismic zone 2, 3, 4 and 5. Okay, and each of this seismic zone, okay, for this seismic zone there is basically the response spectra available, and of course depending upon the soil site there is also some modification, but let us just only focus on the seismic zones here. So each of this seismic zone would give you this response spectra and you can utilize that response spectra to find out again the peak responses. Okay, and we utilize the concept of structural dynamics in first finding out the response spectrum and then from that finding out the design spectrum. Is this clear up to this point? Now, a common practice anywhere, especially in a country like ours, is that if you don't know something, just use a factor of safety and increase the section sizes or increase. So let us say if you are applying factor of safety to section sizes. Okay, so you did some analysis. You constructed a structure. Not constructed a structure, you came up with some values of the what should be the dimension, what should be the structure, what should be the other parameters. Okay, and then you are not too sure about whether this analysis is accurate or not. So what people typically do, they use a factor of safety, let us say 1.5, and they think that it is going to be safe. Now we are going to see seismic analysis or not, whether having a factor of safety or whether increasing the dimensions leads to reduction in the, let us say, forces and its stresses or not. So let us do some problem that would demonstrate these concepts that we have studied till now. Okay, so let us do an example. Okay, in this example, we are going to basically use the method that we have studied. So what we have here, let us say this is a representation of a water tank. Okay, the mass of this tank is 1650 kgs. Okay, and you have here, this is a steel pipe, okay, which is holding this mass. Okay, and the diameter of this steel pipe is basically, let me draw the top view here. Okay, the internal diameter and the external diameter. Okay, those values are, d internal is here 102 and d outer is 114 mm. Both of these are in mm. And the moment of inertia about the bending axis is also given as, so you don't have to calculate that, 304 centimeter. Okay, and this is a steel pipe, so I'm taking E value as 200,000. Okay, MPa. Okay, and damping is given to you as 2%. So what do you need to find out? What is the peak deformation or U naught? And you need to find out, okay, what is the maximum bending stress? Okay, subject to a ground motion for which the response spectra is given to you. Can you see the response spectra? Let me increase it further. So this is the response spectra that is given to you. Okay, these parameters are given to you. This is for this response spectra has been developed for zeta equal to 2%. Okay, so you need to find out what is the U naught and, okay, and what is the value of the bending stress in this pipe section. Okay, so take 5-10 minutes and try to solve this problem using the procedure that we have just described.
The height of the structure is not given.
Yes, I forgot to give you that. This is 4 meters. Done? Anyone with the answer? What is the maximum deformation?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Is it 95.6 mm?
Let us see. Let us see what do you get. You got 95.
0.6.
Okay.
And sigma is 817.39 megapascal.
817 cannot be, because typically steel yields at much smaller value. So unless, let us see, let us calculate, see what do we get. See, this is a cantilever type column, right? So how do we get the lateral stiffness K for this? We can get it as 3 EI by L cube. Okay, so this would be 3 times 200,000 MPa. 1 MPa is 10 to the power 6 Newton per meter square. So I will write 10 to the power 6. And I is also given to me as, how much is that? 301 centimeter square. Okay, so I'm going to convert that to meter square. So this you can write at 10 to the power minus 8 to convert it to meter square. And L cube is 4 to the power cube. Okay, so this you can calculate. Okay, and you can get this one as somewhere 56437.5 kilonewton. Is it? No, not this much. It's coming out to be around 28219 Newton per meter. 28219 Newton per meter. Because why do I need K? Because for response spectra, whenever it is given, you need either Tn or omega n, depending upon in which quantity the response spectra is provided. And for Tn, you need basically mass and K. The mass is already known to you. The K value you need to calculate. So let us see what do I get as Tn. 2 pi root under m is, okay, where is m? 1650 divided by 28219. Okay, and let us see what do I get. So this I approximately get as 1.52 second. Are all of you getting this value of the time period? 1.52 second?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
When you get the time period, the next step is to refer to the response spectra, okay, which is provided to you. So now I go here and I look at 1.52. Okay, remember this is a linear scale here on x and y axis. This is 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, so on. It goes up to 2. So 1.52 would be somewhere around here. Okay, so the value is coming out to be little bit higher than 0.2. And you can have a look at it. Okay, 0.2, 0.3 is here. This is 0.25. So it is approximately, pseudo acceleration is approximately equal to 0.22 g. Okay. Now, once you get the acceleration, can you not find out the peak displacement? How do you do that? Just divide a by omega n square, or I can also write this as Tn by 2 pi whole square times a. Let us see what do we get. So it would be 1.52 square times 0.22 times 9.8. It is coming out to be 0.126 meter, or I can say this is 126 millimeter. All of you getting this as your deformation, the peak displacement? Given the structural properties and given the response spectra for a particular ground motion, I have now found out the peak deformation in the system. Okay, once I know the peak deformation, okay, I can say that this is structure is basically undergoing through this deformation, which is equal to u naught. So what would be the, let us say, how would I do the analysis? I'm just going to apply equivalent static force, which I can calculate either k times u naught, or I can calculate is m times acceleration. You'll see that both of these would give you the same value. So if I consider mass times acceleration, okay, it would be 1650, okay, times acceleration is 0.22 times the g value is 9.8. So this gives you around 3557 Newton. Okay, if that is known to you, you can go ahead and find out what is the base shear or base moment. Base shear is not required, but I'm going to find it anyway. Base shear would be 3557 times the height of this. Okay, so just multiply this with 4 and it would come out to be approximately as 14230 Newton. No, this is base moment. Okay, base shear would be just simply this value here. Okay, so the base moment I have found out. Now, see, if you remember from your solid mechanics class, okay, the I value is already given to you. Let us say this is the Y value, which is, so how do I find out the peak stress? Peak stress occurs at the largest distance from the neutral axis, and the formula for the stress is moment which is being applied to this section here. Let us say my by the moment of inertia about the bending axis. Now, the peak distance from the neutral axis in this case would be half of the outer diameter. So y would be 114 by 2. So 57 mm would be the y value. So sigma would be, this is Newton meter, 14230 times y. Let us write it in terms of meters, 0.07, and then I have moment of inertia 10 to the power minus 8. So I can 0.057 multiply this and divide it by that quantity to get us 301. So it comes out to be 269.5 into 10 to the power 6 Newton per meter square. Or I can write it in terms of, okay, MPa, just this value. Okay, so this is, so the final stress, bending stress comes out to be around 270 MPa. All right. Now, what happens, and which is typically the case, this is my first design trial, and I find out that 270 MPa maybe is too much for my section, and I do not feel comfortable. I want higher safety margin. So I want to reduce the stress in the column. And how do I reduce the stress? One way to do that is to increase the section sizes, right? So if you have a column, okay, I can include, and if it's a circular column, I can perhaps increase the column diameter. So what I decide that I'm going to increase the column diameter in this case, so that my stress value is reduced. Basically, and like, that is my intended goal. Okay, my intention is that. Okay, so what do? I increase the column section so that now my internal diameter and the external diameter becomes, okay, let me just give you the values, 203 mm, and the external diameter is 219 mm. Other properties remain same. So the total mass, height, the response spectra remain same. Only thing is that in the next design iteration, I want to reduce the stress. Okay, because remember, stress is basically what? It is my by I. So it depends on I here and y in the denominator. Now I is fourth power, okay, of dimension typically, isn't it? And y is a single power of dimension. So typically if I increase the section sizes, this values increases significantly compared to the numerator, and you typically get smaller value of the stress. And that is the thinking behind increasing the section size to reduce the stress. Okay. Now with these increased sizes, okay, can you again give me what is the modified value of the stress that you get? Remember, all other parameters remain same. One thing to notice here would be, you are increasing the section diameter. Remember that your stiffness is also going to change. It is 3I by L cube. So a lot of other things are also going to change here. So you'll need to calculate the time period again, find the maximum deformation, acceleration, peak forces, and the base moment again. Okay, so repeat the same calculation and see what do you get as the stress zeta, and we would see a very interesting conclusion. Wait, I forgot to give you. After changing this, okay, my I would change, and you don't have to calculate, although there is a formula pi by, I think, 32 d14 minus d24, but I'm just giving you the value of the moment of inertia after making these changes. Rest of the parameter remains same, so you don't need to actually calculate this. Anyone with the answer? Just the value in terms of let us first say displacement, or the acceleration, displacement at this value.
So it is deformation 62.97 mm.
What is it displacement?
Oh yes, sir.
62.9.
69 millimeter.
69 millimeter.
I got 65.78.
There might be small differences, like, and that error might come from, like, reading the graph here. Okay. And that's why we use the design graph, so that the designers don't make such kind of mistakes. So while being on the conservative side, we approximate it instead something like this. Okay. But anyway, so let us see. I mean, once I increase the diameter, what happens? When you increase the diameter, your moment of inertia goes up from 301 centimeter, okay, to the power 4 to 3018. Okay, so my K value actually increases. So I know that if I increase the moment of inertia while keeping the other parameters constant, my structure becomes more stiffer, or K value would increase. And I can perhaps go ahead and substitute those values. So again, I can substitute, okay, and this is 3018, 10 to the power minus 8, and this is 4 to the power cube. If you substitute this, okay, let me calculate this quickly. Yes, you will get as 282,938 Newton per meter. So you can find out the modified time period, 2 pi under root m by k. Okay, substitute this k value and m. Okay, 1650 divided by 282,938. Okay, so it comes out to be around 0.48 second. Okay, so once the time period is known, see what happens. You increase the diameter, my moment of inertia went up, my time period actually reduced because the structure becomes stiffer. So now I'm going from this, which was originally around 1.5, to around this, a stiffer zone here. Okay, around somewhere around here. So let us say this is around this point. And at this point, basically, I get my pseudo acceleration as 1.1 g. Okay, is it 1.1 g? Yes, around 1.1 g, right? So for this value, let us say what is u naught here. Okay, it would be a by omega n square, which would be Tn by 2 pi square times 1.1 g. How much I get after substituting the value? 0.48 divided by. So it is, I'm getting approximately 63 mm. Okay, so as I said, you might see some variation, because if you look at here, if you just shift it a little bit, you go from 1.1 to 1.2 suddenly. Okay, and that is a zaggedness that is not, like, preferred in design. Okay, so let us say I'm getting 63 mm. Once I get the 63 mm as my, so this is 1.1 g, this is 63 mm. Let us say what is zeta here. Okay, sorry, first let us calculate the base shear, which would be the equivalent static force times h, and this would be, let us say, mass times acceleration times h. Okay, mass is given as 1650, acceleration as 1.1 g, and this is 4. So it would be 1650 into 1.1 times 9.8 times 4. So around it comes out to 71148. Okay, so my stress would be my by I, and now y would be half of the external diameter. So it would be 71148 times 0.212 divided by 2 and divided by I, which is 3018 10 to the power minus 8. Okay, so comes out to be 258. Okay. All right, so what we are seeing here in this case, let us say this is come out to be 258 MPa. Okay. Now, as I increase my d value, okay, my displacement or the structure becomes stiffer, so my displacement decreases. Okay, but my time period also changes here. And remember, in the end, stress is a combination of the moment that is generated, y and I. Now the moment might increase or decrease depending upon how much of the force the structure is attracting. So in this case, okay, maybe problem what I've done here, okay, from here, okay, I have read it around 0.5 to 1.1 G, but if I make it 1.2 G, let us say at 0.48, then I think perhaps my stresses will increase here, isn't it? I don't see any significant reduction. This is 270 MPa. And although I change my moment of inertia to around 10 times, okay, this has only become approximately 260 MPa. Okay, and if I had read that just little bit around here, which is around 1.2 G, okay, this would have even increased. Okay, the stresses would have even increased, and I can do that calculation, and then I can see that if I take A equal to 1.2 G at 0.48 second, okay, in fact, I should have done that. I have read it at 0.5. I should have read it at 0.48. In that case, A would become 1.2 G, so that my displacement becomes, okay, or my force, equivalent force becomes mass times 1.2 G, okay, times, well, this is the force. Okay, so 16 times, okay, which is equal to 19404. So in that case, my sigma would become 0.219 divided by 2. Okay, so this would become here 19404 into 0.219 divided by 2, and then 3018 into 10 to the power minus 8. And we can go ahead and we can calculate this. And this is, remember, this would be times 4 here. Okay, because of this force need to be multiplied, mass would be, moment would be 19404 times 4. Okay, so I'm just multiplying this with 4, and this I become, now I get as 281.6 MPa. Okay, so what do I see? If I increase the section dimension, okay, it might decrease or increase both. Okay, if I read it correctly here, this is the A value that I get, 1.2 G, and if I calculate the forces, base forces and the moment, and subsequently the stresses are actually increasing by increasing the section dimension. Why is that happening? Because this is not a gravity analysis. In gravity analysis versus seismic, typically when you increase the section size, your stress decreases. However, if you change the section size in seismic, your stress might increase or decrease, because it also depends on the time period, which was not the case in static analysis. So in my by I, remember that moment is actually fixed for gravity analysis. However, for seismic analysis, moment changes depending upon the time period of the structure. Okay, while these values actually reduced. Okay, so it is combination of moment y and I, and depending upon the stress might increase and decrease. And this is the biggest error that designer makes for the seismic analysis, by thinking that if you make the section larger, then you would have smaller stresses in the structure, which is not always the case. Although the deformation is actually reduced. Okay, deformation is actually reduced here. Okay, acceleration actually has increased, because initially my acceleration was around, where was the acceleration here? If you look at here, okay, in the first case, acceleration was around 0.22 G. And because now the section has become stiffer, my acceleration has suddenly shot up to 1.2 G, and it leads to higher acceleration. So remember this thing, that increasing the section sizes might not lead to the safer seismic design always. Okay, so you have to actually find out and do the calculation, find out what that lead to. Is this problem clear to all of you? Especially the point that factor of safety would not necessarily need to safer design for, especially for earthquake resistant design. Thank you.